we start, I'd like you to have a think about the personal objects that you've got on you right now. In your pockets, amongst all the fluff, in your handbag, your man bag, your knapsack, whatever it is. Do you have any item on you that would really reveal who you are? It would really say something about you as a person that maybe can't be said about anyone else in this room. I had a revelation in 2021 when I was writing the book about a famous rock star who tragically died at the age of 27. And this revelation was that we can really be revealed through the personal objects we've left in our wake. Now, you might be like me, you might not carry those kind of things around with you very much. They might be in shoeboxes under your bed like they are for me. But this was a way of looking at the world that really opened up things for me. I started researching this book just as lockdown was beginning. And I'd always been fascinated by scenes in which lots of creative people speak truths about themselves and the world, such as the grunge scene in the 90s. And figures like Kurt Cobain, who was the frontman of Nirvana, who you might have heard of, who spoke truths about themselves and about the world through their art. And also individuals like Courtney Love, who's the lead singer of Hole, who Cobain was married to. And then other people as well, like Kristen Pfaff had always fascinated me, who was a member of Courtney Love's Hole and also tragically died, like Cobain, at the age of 27, though not of her own hand, of an accidental heroin overdose. Now, I don't know what it is about these kinds of creative people that has always really fascinated me. It might be because I was brought up on the Isle of Wight, which is admittedly not the most rock and roll place in the world. Although I think bands like Wet Leg are trying to bring that back a bit. But for some reason, I was drawn to these people, and when I approached Kristen Pfaff's brother, Jason, himself a brilliant artist, he said that he knew a bit about my writing and how I'd written a bit about music, and he said that he would share with me the archive that his sister had left behind, which has never been opened before. Now, what was really interesting about this was she'd recorded her diary on a series of cassettes. Does anyone remember cassettes? And in these diary recordings, she'd spoken about her relationships with all of these famous people on the grunge scene, people like Kurt Cobain and Courtney Love, and offered her insights on creativity and the world and music and her private life and her relationships, and even her family hadn't heard these tapes. So I was in this strange position in lockdown of listening to this recordings of this woman who I was never going to meet, who would never even know that I existed, and hearing her views on pretty much everything. And then when word got out that I was writing this book about her, people started to get in touch with me from all over the world, from Mexico, from Spain, from Brazil, and say, Kristen Pfaff really meant something to me. She touched me as an icon, for instance, or as a musician. A few people said to me she was the reason I picked up the bass. And I got thinking, perhaps it's not just what we do with our lives in our day-to-day life that has an impact on people. Perhaps it's other things that we do with our lives as well, such as what we represent and if we're iconic in some way or meaningful to people. Because Kristen Pfaff meant something to people as far more than just a musician. Now, the band that she joined, that she became famous for being a member of, Hole, had a bit of a reputation before she joined them. They'd made a noisy but critically acclaimed album called Pretty on the Inside. But when Kristen, as I came to call her, joined the band, she lifted their musicianship to a whole new level. I think she was probably one of the few classically trained musicians on this grunge scene. And she brought into Hole the lyrics from her previous band, Janitor Joe, including the chorus from the song that would make up Miss World, which would be Hole's first hit. And Hole would go on to make other records without Kristen Pfaff, such as Celebrity Skin. But it was really Live Through This which made a mark on the world and made her famous. And in her diary tape, she talks about what was going on behind the scenes as she made this, I think, masterpiece. Live Through This, when it was released, was described by Rolling Stone as one of the top 500 albums of all time and as the most potent blast of female insurgency ever committed to tape. The most potent blast of female insurgency ever committed to tape. I found that such an interesting quote because as I started to go into her archive, I realized that there was this thread running through her life. Everything that she'd done, every job that she'd had, every persona, every phase, was all about empowering women in some way, even if it was about empowering herself. And it made me think, in our own lives, do we have a thread running through everything that we've done? Does there seem to be like a theme as to why we're here and what we're supposed to be doing with our time on this planet? And I started to understand that the different phases that we have all are like pieces in a mosaic. And when we step back, we can see the full mosaic of who a person is by looking at each piece one by one. So in her archive, I stumbled across this photo of a young Kristen Pfaff trying to get past what looks like some kind of security guard or police officer. When she was a student at the University of Minnesota, she'd been outraged at the number of assaults taking place on women at the campus there. And so after a long day of marking papers to try and make some money, her and a group of other students took over the president of the university's offices in a kind of a protest. I lecture at universities now, and I can't really imagine such a thing happening these days. But unlike a lot of these protests, which can maybe annoy a lot of people but not actually change anything, this protest did change things. The security on the campus increased as a result, and the number of assaults on women rapidly decreased. And to this day, the University of Minnesota is a much safer place because of what Kristen Pfaff did. A woman who's known mainly as a rock star, a member of this 27 club with people like Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix, was also a really successful activist who changed the world in a hugely important way. Now, what I found really fascinating is when I went into her archive, I realized that she'd played all of these different roles. And whether it was in her first forays onto the internet or in just comments she made in essays that she wrote when she was at university, I could see from the personal effects this woman had left behind how she felt about pretty much everything. I know opinions that she has about people, some of which I couldn't share but could make some pretty good headlines, and themes and ideas that the world doesn't know, that even her family doesn't know that she thinks. I was able to gain her views on politics, capitalism, creativity, art, all because it was in her archive and these different photos that she'd left behind. And I could see whether she was a cheerleader or a prom queen, her trying to find her feet in the world, working out who she was by putting on different masks. And I also realized the healing capacity that the archive can have. You might not have lots of photos that you've left in your wake, but there was a very powerful photo in her archive, and it shows her on her wedding day. Now, a lot of people don't realize that Kristen Pfaff, for a short period of time, got married, was a wife. One of the reasons I think people don't know this is because she kept it a secret from her family, who were understandably very hurt that their daughter hadn't invited them to the wedding and kept it a secret from her. But in her diary, she revealed the real reason she'd done this. And I knew about it because I'd listened to it in lockdown in this bizarre position where I was listening to all these tapes and we couldn't go out into the world and feeling this strange bond with this person. She revealed that to her, getting married was something that she wanted to do as a kind of a punk rock gesture. She wanted to do something that bucked the trend of what people had expected of her all of her life. And she loved her family very much and hadn't wanted to hurt them in any way, but she also wanted someone with her when she traveled to Europe. So the marriage didn't last very long, and her family were reconciled. But this information that I had was potentially healing to her family, decades after this woman was no longer on the planet. So all this made me think about my own personal effects and what they might say about me. And I think the first thing I would say is, if you open up the shoeboxes under your bed and all of your mementos, is prepare to be embarrassed. I stumbled across various photos of me in various different guises, and I realized that there was a thread running through my life as well. I hadn't necessarily always wanted to be an author, or at least I didn't think I did. I actually was of the mind that I wanted to be a singer for quite a long time. My mother is a very talented singer, my grandmother is a very talented singer, and when I was a boy, I was entered into these singing competitions, and I won one or two of them, and many of them I didn't. And so to me, creativity, art, singing were kind of about self-discipline and professionalism rather than actually creatively expressing yourself. I think I realized that my love of music was maybe a little bit unusual when I was about 15, and the band Radiohead put out the album OK Computer, and everyone was saying what a masterpiece this record was. And I just had to hear it. So I got a friend to copy me a cassette. Do you remember those days of people making each other mixtapes? I got a friend to make me a cassette of OK Computer, and I actually skived off PE for the afternoon. and in the matron's office, listened to it on my little Walkman. That was just how important this stuff was to me. I taught myself to play the guitar on an 18-pound guitar from Argos, formed a series of pretty dreadful bands. As I got older, the bands got a bit less dreadful, and I was eventually the singer of a band called Albanova, and we were offered a deal. And we had our first headline gig in London, which Chris Evans attended, and I found myself in the offices of Warner Brothers talking to the man who'd signed Take That and Muse, talking about my singing career, which didn't actually exist. And then we recorded an EP adorned with violins and cellos in a studio in Wiltshire that Page and Plant from Led Zeppelin had just evicted, and it all seemed to be happening, and I was really excited. And then, like so many of these bands do, the whole thing just kind of collapsed. But despite my failure to make it as a singer, I did carry my love of music over into my career as an author. And I've tended to write about artists in my books, whether or not it's ballerinas in the Russian ballet scene, which I traveled to that country to research, or grunge musicians. I've always loved trying to portray people in a three-dimensional way in my novels. And in my non-fiction writing, which I've increasingly started to do, I found the best way to do this was if I had access to someone's archive in some way. And so when I opened up my archive, just as had happened with Kristen Pfaff, I found this trail of a person. I could see all of the guises and personas that I'd made and the path that I was on in some way. I could see the embarrassing photo of the time I tried to dress up like Brett Anderson from Suede in a black fur coat and thought I looked really wonderful, and the sort of stuff that now makes me grimace. And I could see the first cutting from my debut interview with the Northern Echo magazine when my novel came out, where I talked about the cartoon mouse that had inspired me to write. I'd been sat in my dad's study as a boy. My dad had this wonderful video archive, and there was a film there about a mouse that stows on board a ship bound to America, and I thought, that's what I want to do. I want to tell stories. Perhaps you can work out from my age what mouse this might have been. And I could also see in this archive just the dead ends that I'd taken. I could see from the lyric sheets that I had that I was writing too many words to fit into songs. And perhaps this was someone who was going to be an author. I could just see every lily pad that I was going to jump on next in my life. And the thread that was running through it was music. I could see that I was becoming less interested in expressing myself and more interested in talking about other people, sharing their message and talking about the world. And what I'd invite you to do, if you can bear it, is look under the bed, look at those objects, and think about the person that's emerging from them. They might be clothes that you have that reveal who you are. The reason I'm wearing this jacket is because it's the jacket I used to wear on stage with my band. In a weird way, it's a kind of a revealing item about me. If you open up those shoe boxes and you see what's inside, I think you might be surprised. Who is the person that's emerging from them? Are they who you think you are? And where is that person going? Thank you.